2 years ago, when Vladimir Putin launched what he expected to be a swift military conquest of Ukraine, few anticipated the huge toll it would take on Russia's war machine. By 2022, Russia had over 3,000 battle-ready tanks and one of the largest armies in the world. Yet today, Ukraine has managed to destroy the equivalent of Russia's entire initial tank fleet, indicating a major setback for Putin's ambitions. At the start of the invasion, around 300,000 to 350,000 Russian troops were deployed to Ukraine. Now it is estimated that Russian casualties, including dead, wounded, and missing, are at similar numbers, between 300,000 and 350,000. This means for every soldier that crossed into Ukraine, another has fallen. This means the initial force sent to invade Ukraine has been effectively wiped out. The war has exposed cracks in Russia's ability to sustain such attrition. Tank losses have been particularly severe. Over 2 years, Russia has lost more than 3,000 tanks, which translates to about 1,500 annually. However, its production capacity can only replace 500 to 600 tanks per year, leaving Russia unable to replenish its forces at the same rate they are being destroyed. Reports from Western intelligence also show that Russia is now relying on older, outdated tank models like the T-62 and T-72, further indicating a depletion of modern hardware. The manpower issue is just as extreme. Although Russia continues to draft and deploy new soldiers, many are undertrained and lack combat experience. Unlike the initial invasion force, which had a mix of experienced professionals, the newer recruits often receive minimal preparation. According to military analysts, these inexperienced troops are more likely to suffer casualties, further straining Russia's ability to maintain its military presence. The war has evolved into a grinding conflict of attrition, but Ukraine's determination and Western support have severely eroded Russia's once formidable military power. As the losses increase, questions are being raised about how long Russia can continue to sustain its offensive before the strain becomes unsustainable. Russia's armored vehicles are facing a crisis that reveals a deeper vulnerability in its war efforts. Over the past 2 years, nearly 9,000 armored vehicles have been destroyed, around 4,500 annually. While Russia's production lines are managing to replace roughly the same number each year, this balance is more illusion than reality. Most of the so-called new vehicles being sent to the front lines are anything but modern. Up to 80% of these replacements are refurbished Soviet-era models, many of which were abandoned in storage for decades. Satellite images have shown these vehicles being retrieved from scrapyards, rushed through basic repairs, and deployed into battle with minimal upgrades, if any. Often, they are sent to the front with outdated armor and equipment that barely meets the demands of modern warfare. The performance of these relics has been disastrous. Against Ukraine's advanced weaponry, such as drones, Javelin anti-tank missiles, and precision-guided artillery, these older vehicles stand little chance. Some are so degraded from years of neglect that even small arms fire can breach their defenses. Instead of providing reliable protection, they create a false sense of security for the soldiers inside, leading to devastating battlefield outcomes. And the situation is about to get even worse. Current intelligence suggests that Russia's stockpile of Soviet-era vehicles is running out. By early 2025, most of the remaining vehicles that can be refurbished quickly will have been used up. After that, Russia will need to turn to older, more heavily damaged stock, requiring longer and more expensive overhauls. By 2026, analysts predict that these reserves will be almost entirely exhausted. This reliance on outdated equipment shows a major flaw in Russia's strategy. While these relics may temporarily shore up numbers, they fail to meet the quality required for modern combat. As losses continue to outpace production, maintaining even the current level of armored capability will become increasingly impossible, leaving Russia's forces at a huge disadvantage. Russia's ongoing struggles with equipment shortages have forced its military to adopt unconventional and risky solutions to maintain its operational capabilities. A notable example is the deployment of unarmored personnel carriers, designed to transport large numbers of soldiers quickly to the battlefield, but offering minimal protection, thereby compromising the safety of the troops. One such solution involves the use of lightweight off-road vehicles resembling unarmored golf carts. These vehicles lack armor, doors, and basic safety features, making them highly vulnerable to attacks from drones, small arms fire, and shrapnel. Despite these vulnerabilities, Russia has placed substantial orders for these vehicles, producing thousands to offset the loss of traditional armored personnel carriers. Their low cost and simple design allow for rapid production, but their open structure leaves soldiers dangerously exposed. Prior to adopting these golf carts, Russia heavily relied on a vehicle nicknamed the Loaf. Originally designed in 1965 and resembling the iconic Volkswagen bus, the Loaf is a cheap and simplistic transport vehicle that costs between $10,000 and $15,000. Its mechanical simplicity, free of advanced electronic components, makes it easy to produce even under sanctions. On top of that, its high clearance and four-wheel drive allow it to navigate rough terrain, making it somewhat effective as a logistics vehicle. However, using the Loaf as a combat transport has proven disastrous. It offers no armor to protect its passengers and has major design flaws, such as unprotected petrol fuel tanks mounted on its sides. These tanks are highly flammable, and Ukrainian FPV drones have exploited this vulnerability, destroying these vehicles at an alarming rate. The Loaf's reliance on petrol, which ignites more easily than diesel, has only worsened the issue. This high attrition rate has likely contributed to Russia's shift toward the even cheaper and lighter golf cart-like vehicles, which minimize material losses but place soldiers in increasingly vulnerable positions. This shift in strategy indicates the Russian military's broader struggles with production capacity and resource constraints. Massive losses of traditional armored vehicles in battles, such as those in Vuhledar and Avdiivka, have left the military unable to replace them adequately. Instead of deploying modern, protective vehicles, Russia has resorted to these stopgap measures, which sacrifice troop safety for speed and affordability. Russia's military has increasingly relied on unconventional methods to address equipment shortages during the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Lightweight all-terrain vehicles, ATVs, and unarmored motorcycles have become important tools in transporting supplies and artillery rounds to the front lines. However, these vehicles come with major vulnerabilities. The motorcycles, often loaded with munitions, have unprotected fuel tanks mounted on their frames, making them easy targets for Ukrainian drones and small arms fire. Despite these risks, motorcycles and ATVs provide certain tactical advantages. Their compact size and agility make them harder to detect from the air, and their ability to navigate challenging terrains allows them to bypass areas where larger vehicles might be ambushed or destroyed. This mobility supports a swarm strategy, where large numbers of vehicles are deployed simultaneously to ensure that at least a portion of the supplies reach their destination. However, this approach acknowledges an inevitable human cost, as not all vehicles and their operators are expected to survive. The ongoing demographic problem in Russia worsens the human cost of these tactics. The war has taken a huge toll on Russia's young male population, with major casualties among soldiers and hundreds of thousands fleeing the country to avoid conscription. When the conflict began, Russia had roughly 7 million men in their 20s. Since then, this number has declined by over 15% due to both battlefield losses and emigration, reducing the pool of able-bodied recruits and workers. This demographic instability has forced the government to raise the maximum mobilization age from 60 to 70 years, showing a growing reliance on older recruits. Beyond the battlefield, the loss of young men also poses challenges for Russia's economy and society. These individuals are needed to serve in the military and also to contribute to the workforce, generate tax revenue, and sustain population growth. Experts predict that within the next 6 to 10 years, Russia may face severe limitations in conducting major military offensives due to this shrinking pool of young men. This demographic decline threatens the sustainability of Russia's military capabilities, potentially making the Ukraine conflict one of its last large-scale engagements for the foreseeable future. In response, President Vladimir Putin has initiated aggressive policies aimed at reversing population decline. He has publicly emphasized the importance of increasing the birth rate, urging Russian women to have more children to preserve old traditions. This call is a strategic effort to boost the nation's population for future economic and military needs. However, these demographic initiatives face major challenges. Economic instability, Widespread corruption and the ongoing conflict have created an environment where starting and raising large families is increasingly difficult. The loss of young men to the war also reduces the number of potential fathers, further complicating efforts to boost birth rates. Beyond demographic concerns, Russia's military losses extend to its naval and air forces. Since the onset of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Russia has lost nearly one-third of its Black Sea fleet, amounting to approximately 40% of the fleet's naval tonnage. These losses have been inflicted by Ukraine through the use of asymmetric warfare tactics, including anti-ship missiles, naval drones, and speedboats. Ukraine's ability to neutralize a huge portion of Russia's naval power, despite lacking a comparable navy, underscores the effectiveness of these strategies. The degradation of the Black Sea Fleet has had broader implications for Russia's naval operations. The British Defense Minister has stated that the fleet has been declared functionally inactive, leading to strategic ripple effects across Russia's other naval theaters. This reduction in naval capability limits Russia's ability to project power and secure its maritime interests. These issues worsen Russia's limited capacity to rebuild and upgrade its naval forces. The country has a shortage of dry docks necessary for ship repairs and construction. On top of that, international sanctions have restricted access to essential naval components and technology, hindering efforts to replace lost ships and modernize the fleet. This inability to replenish naval assets mirrors challenges faced in other military domains, where losses in equipment and personnel outpace Russia's capacity for replacement and recovery. But that's not all. Russia's Air Force, which was once considered a very important part of its military power, is struggling to maintain its strength amidst rising losses and operational issues. Over the course of the conflict in Ukraine, the Russian Air Force has lost at least 342 planes and 325 helicopters, which shows its inability to secure air superiority. Despite being one of the largest air forces in the world, Russia has failed to dominate a country with significantly less advanced air capabilities. Adding to these losses is the rapid wear and tear on its aircraft due to never-ending operational demands. Planes are being pushed beyond their limits with repeated missions, forcing many to be retired prematurely. By the end of the year, over 60 aircraft are expected to be grounded due to overuse, and only a fraction of these will be replaced with new production models. This does not even account for the aircraft lost in combat, further depleting Russia's air fleet. As new aircraft are introduced to replace losses, they are increasingly piloted by less experienced aviators. The training gap has resulted in inexperienced pilots being thrust into combat, leading to higher attrition rates. This issue is likely to worsen with the arrival of F-16 fighter jets in Ukraine, which will present a major challenge to Russia's already stretched air force. The loss of cutting-edge air defense systems like the S-400 is making the Air Force's problems worse. The S-400, which was formerly regarded as a top-tier anti-aircraft system, has not lived up to expectations, especially when it comes to Ukraine's use of contemporary tactics and technologies. Estimates suggest that Russia's stockpile of these systems has been halved since the start of the conflict, and Ukrainian forces continue to destroy them at a rapid rate. These losses are creating severe gaps in Russia's air defenses, just as Western air support is beginning to enter the conflict in a meaningful way. In light of these challenges, Russia has reduced the use of its air force, aiming to conserve what remains of its aerial assets. Offensive operations across Ukraine have also slowed due to heavy losses of tanks and infantry vehicles. The focus has shifted to holding on to occupied territories, though whether this approach is sustainable remains uncertain. Economic factors only add to the problem. Russia's economy, smaller than that of Italy, limits its ability to replace lost equipment and invest in training new personnel. These financial constraints are hindering efforts to rebuild the Air Force, leaving it increasingly vulnerable as the conflict drags on. Russia's Air Force now finds itself in a difficult position, weakened by combat losses, overuse of equipment, and a shortage of skilled pilots. The depletion of advanced air defense systems further exposes vulnerabilities, particularly as Ukraine's air capabilities improve with Western support. As these issues converge, the long-term viability of Russia's air strategy and its broader military operations is increasingly in question. Don't forget to subscribe for more updates and check out this video on the current state of Russia's military challenges for an in-depth look at the situation.